President Trump privately floats the idea of firing the chairman of the Federal Reserve, then publicly backs away. Markets shiver, then recover. Senator Elizabeth Warren, long a critic of the Fed chair, tells us why he shouldn't be fired and takes stock of the Trump economy. And former Vice President Mike Pence tells me it is time for Trump to order the release of all Jeffrey Epstein files. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington, and welcome to the Takeout. The Federal Reserve was created in the early 20th century to avoid runs on banks and the economic ravages that flowed from them. This was a big problem back then. In the decades since, it has taken on more tasks, the ones you've probably heard about: maximizing employment, taming inflation, and moderating long-term interest rates. As such, the Fed touches your life, as interest rates, of course, reverberate through all your accumulated credit and, of course, through the ledgers of those from whom you buy goods and services. Also, the dollar is the global reserve currency, and the independence of the Federal Reserve, our central bank, is also central, if you will, to its stability and investability. President Trump has been toying for weeks with the idea of firing Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, whom Trump first appointed in 2017. Yesterday, Trump asked a group of House Republicans privately if he should fire Powell. This trial balloon, of course, was leaked and was designed to apply maximum heat on Powell and the Fed Board of Governors to lower interest rates, as Trump has demanded for months. Stock market reaction today vacillated between fear and loathing to, oh, he's just kidding. About all this, we begin tonight with Nancy Cordes at the White House. Nancy, walk us through this rollicking day at the Trump White House, and I know they're pretty common there, with the future and the fate of Jerome Powell.
Well, Major, I think you set it up really well. You know, it's no surprise to anyone that Trump wants to replace Jerome Powell with someone who he thinks would be more aggressive about lowering interest rates. It's no secret that he has been toying with the idea of firing Powell, but he has always stopped short of actually saying that he would do it. And that changed last night because, according to our reporting at CBS News, he was meeting with a group of Republican lawmakers in the Oval Office on a different topic, and he waved around a letter that he had drafted firing Powell, and he indicated to those lawmakers that he was, in fact, ready to go through with it. And so that's what we reported this morning. Others confirmed our reporting, and the reaction from the financial world was immediate. As you pointed out, there was a dip in the stock market. The value of the dollar briefly went down as well until President in the Oval Office this morning said, no, I never suggested I was going to fire him. I just asked the lawmakers if they thought I should do it, and many of them thought I should, but I'm not going to. I'm more conservative about this than they are. So that is where things stand right now. President still suggests that he could go through with it down the road, but he is not taking action right now. And of course, there is this open legal question about whether he even has the authority to fire the Fed chair, who runs this quasi-public agency. The Supreme Court has suggested that the president doesn't have that power, and the Fed chair himself has said flat out that he's not leaving, even if President Trump tells him to, until his term expires mid-next year.
Right. So if the president were to take this unprecedented, and I know that word is often overused in the Trump era, but in this case, I think it would apply, action, Powell would fight it legally, and then this would be a test case, and then we would have possible market volatility, not just here, but globally.
Right. All of this over someone who is already scheduled to leave their post in less than a year. So what we've heard from Republicans today on the Hill and even some White House officials is they understand that perhaps the juice is not worth the squeeze for the president in this situation. And that's before you even consider, Major, that the Federal Reserve Chair obviously has a lot of power to set the agenda, but he's not the only person at the Fed who decides whether to raise or lower rates. That is voted on by a team of 12. So even if he's gone, there's no guarantee the president is going to get what he wants.
With everything we need to know on this topic and more, Nancy Cordes, my thanks. Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren joins me now. Senator, it's great to have you with us. I want to, for the benefit of my audience, lay down a bit of a track record as we talk about Jerome Powell. Because when he was nominated the first time, you were the only member of the Senate Banking Committee to oppose his nomination. When he was renominated, you were the only member of the Senate Banking Committee again to oppose his nomination. So your record on Jay Powell is clear. Differentiate from my audience what that is and the threat or danger of President Trump issuing veiled and not so veiled threats to fire Jay Powell.
Well, as you've rightly pointed out, I certainly have policy differences with Jay Powell, but I also believe in the independence of the Fed. There's a reason that the president has a whole cabinet, people who serve at his pleasure, people he can hire and fire. But when it comes to the question of the Fed and the other banking regulators, we've really tried to fence them off. And the Fed, to try to keep them out of politics, so that they are doing monetary policy, so they're doing big bank supervision without getting tangled in the politics of what a president of the United States wants. So when Donald Trump says that he is going to fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, which he has said many times over the past few months, the markets respond pretty badly to that because they say that takes away the independence of the Fed, and that's something that will cost all of us. So I have a lot of policy disagreements with Jerome Powell, but he's independent and he gets to make those policy decisions on his own. His job is not at risk.
Speaking of the markets, Senator Warren, they seem to be telling themselves, oh, Trump's just blowing off steam. There's nothing really dangerous here.
You know, I hear the same thing you do. But I'm worried about this at two levels. Yeah, he's just, blowing off steam until the time he's not and actually does it. But the second is, doing this kind of chaos around the Fed is not free. It costs us. Everybody around the world has to make the decision, do I buy U.S. bonds or not? And we saw what happened a couple of months ago when Donald Trump said he was going to fire the chairman of the Fed, and all of a sudden the bond market, the market that says, yes, I believe, when there's trouble, always run to the United States and buy those bonds because the United States is a dependable financial partner. People around the world said, not really. So I think that what Donald Trump is doing is costly right now to our financial system. Day by day, every time he pulls this nonsense, he just sets a little more of America's credibility on fire.
Therefore, from your vantage point, if I hear you correctly, Senator Warren, whatever the Fed next does, up or down, will be viewed, at least in part, through the political prism already established by the President of the United States.
Yep, that is part of the problem now. Look, I'll say it again. I have stayed after Jerome Powell relentlessly to lower interest rates, but I've tried to persuade him why I thought it was appropriate to lower interest rates. And now we're in a place where Jerome Powell said last month that back in February, he would have lowered interest rates, but for the fact that Donald Trump was creating all this chaos on tariffs. And that made the Fed back off because they said, you're creating this financial uncertainty, and we want to have more flexibility here. And just pause for a minute, because what that means is that every family in America that has a credit card or car loan or other kinds of short-term credit has paid more money over the last 6 months because one man, Donald Trump, created enough chaos that the Fed kept interest rates high. And now what Donald Trump wants to do is put the chairman of the Fed in a political box so that no matter which way he turns, people across the country, investors around the world say, whoa, do we have an independent Fed or not? Or is this just one more arm of Donald Trump's chaos? And we pay a price for that.
More broadly, Senator Warren, evaluate the current state of the Trump economy. The White House says over and over, we're raising about $21 to $22 billion a month in tariff revenue. Inflation is tamed. Job creation is stable. In the president's words, the economy is hotter than ever.
So I'll put it this way. The top line numbers look pretty good. Inflation looks like it's fairly stable. Unemployment looks like it's kind of holding steady. So the top line, and the stock market, has hit record highs. So the top line numbers look good. That is not the lived experience of tens of millions of people across this country. And so when you start to dig the numbers apart, what you start to see is that families are dealing with flat wages and with rising debt loads and with rising defaults on credit card debts and on car loans. Families themselves are telling us through the consumer confidence surveys that they are very worried about their own economic futures. So that's the first part of the disconnect. But then you throw into that Donald Trump has created all of this chaos around tariffs. And the consequence of that has been that nobody wants to invest under those circumstances. Everybody puts on pause. Nobody's going to start a factory. Nobody's going to train a bunch of employees, buy a lot of expensive equipment, if they don't know what the tariff situation is, what it's going to cost to import raw materials, whether or not they're going to get hit on tariffs on exports, reciprocal tariffs. So you've got the chaos around the tariffs. Second thing that you've got going is that the Republicans and Donald Trump have just passed a tax and spend bill that is going to shoot the national debt through the roof. And they're not doing it to do things like to build roads and bridges that will increase productivity. They're not doing it to invest in childcare so that more mamas and daddies can go back to work. Nope. They're doing it to give tax cuts to billionaires and billionaire corporations. And they recognize it's a problem. They use the same argument they've used since Ronald Reagan. They say, oh, that's okay, it'll spur growth, pay for itself. Every independent economic analysis says, no, it won't, never has, won't do it this time. But then there's a third economic grenade rolling in, and that is that they are rapidly cutting the oversight of all of the financial agencies that they exercise over our economy. They're trying to get rid of the CFPB. They're trying to get rid of the accounting oversight. They're trying to roll back the regulations. And that deregulation, inviting more companies to come in and cheat American consumers, inviting them to come in and trick small businesses, ultimately, that puts more risk into our economy. And then just throw in what's happening right now with crypto. One more opportunity to load up risk into the economy. So I see this economy very much like I did when I was ringing the alarm bell before the 2008 crash. And that is, there's a lot of risk building up in this. And if Donald Trump doesn't change direction, he's going to blow this economy up.
It's a conversation I want to have with you more when we have more time. Senator Elizabeth Warren, please come to the studio. We'll have a broader conversation about all that. But thanks for your time. I appreciate it very much.
You bet.
Hoax. That's what President Trump today called all of the questions still being asked, some of them coming from his most ardent supporters, about Jeffrey Epstein and what the FBI and the Department of Justice know or may still know but haven't yet released. The president said those asking these questions have been duped by Democrats, even referred to some of them as, quote, past supporters. Today was a day in all this, for sure. Jake Rosen joins me now. Jake, I want to play for our audience some sound in the past on this question of Epstein files and what those in the Trump movement thought about it. Let's listen.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
Donald Trump is the most transparent president in our nation's history. So not only will America get the full Epstein files, they will get JFK, they will get Martin Luther King.
That Jeffrey Epstein story is a big deal. Please do not let that story go. Keep your eye on this.
Jake, those in the MAGA world are trying to keep their eye on it, and it is creating divisions and rivalries and rhetoric, the kind of which you and I have not seen.
No, we haven't. And I think today it became a political story when President Trump, who not necessarily has an election to win going forward, but he went back in a Truth Social post and again kind of dug himself a little bit further in this hole that we've seen him kind of continued, and the White House to just continue to find themselves in which you call your supporters and the people who are voicing frustrations weaklings. You say that the former people who voted for you, which I'm not really clear who that is, right? But you remember to our audience that a number of pro-Trump influencers went to the White House, got Epstein Files Part 1, which is a public disclosure.
Earlier this year.
Basically in February, really what we already knew, but in a binder with a tease to them in a meeting with Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and others, President Trump, J.D. Vance, that more was coming. These promises obviously were met with just a 2-page memo last week, basically kind of tying up in what was very a loose bow because we saw it kind of explode immediately. Dan Bongino, as we know, didn't show up for work on Friday.
Deputy FBI director, exactly.
And really what we saw today was calls from people like Charlie Kirk, Megyn Kelly, Elon Musk, Steve Bannon, and others in which they're calling for a public-facing event with DOJ leadership, potentially President Trump, to answer questions. And as Charlie Kirk said, come to the sticks for an hour, hour and a half, and take rapid-fire questions because you have to do the PR yourselves. You cannot make these influencers or extremely powerful personalities like Charlie, who ran a voting operation to get out these low-propensity voters who don't have trust of the government, to convince them you should trust Trump. Well, what happens when transparency hits fog? You know, you lose all of that again, right?
And the idea that MAGA needs to move on or let it go has not gained any traction, at least not yet. Jake Rosen, thank you very, very much. Earlier today, former Vice President Mike Pence sat down with us for a wide-ranging interview, and I asked him about this ongoing conversation and pressure on the Trump administration to do more, to be more transparent in the space around Jeffrey Epstein. Here's part of that conversation. President Trump said that Jeffrey Epstein matter is a hoax. Last week, his Justice Department said there were more than 1,000 victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Last summer, Trump said he was open to declassifying all the relevant files and the Epstein client list, and that his suicide looked suspicious. How can all those things be true and it be a hoax? I don't understand where things stand with all this.
I think the time has come for the administration to release all of the files regarding Jeffrey Epstein's investigation and prosecution. It's important that we protect the names of the victims. They should be excluded from any disclosure. But whether or not the facts justify charges, I think that anyone who participated or was associated with this despicable man ought to be held up to public scrutiny.
One of the most aggressive investigative reporters in our country, Julie K. Brown, was on my show last night, and she said when the Justice Department last week said 1,000 victims, she said that was a higher number than she was familiar with and indicated to her that there have to be accomplices that some of the victims have named that worked with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And she said, shouldn't there be some inquiry into whether or not those people should be exposed to criminal prosecution? Well, do you agree with that?
I just think we ought to get the facts to the American people. I mean, I've always believed in transparency.
And when the president says it's all a hoax, what is he talking about?
Well, Jeffrey Epstein's prosecution began during the Bush administration. Continued.
He's blaming it on Democrats.
The Obama years.
It's not a hoax.
I know of no reason why this administration, once the victims' names are protected, should not release all the files on Jeffrey Epstein.
More of my interview with the former vice president will air throughout this hour here on The Takeout. And you can find our full conversation in the very best place. Where is that? The Takeout YouTube page. Coming up, Adelita Grijalva wins Arizona's House Democratic primary, the victory over a Gen Z activist in the race to succeed her late father. She joins me next. Plus, presidential libraries. Presidents raise millions to support them, and the money is virtually unregulated. Now that's gaining the attention of Senate Democrats. And Vice President Mike Pence, more of our conversation, including why he says TikTok remains a national security threat. That's ahead on The Takeout. back to the Takeout. Adelita Grijalva prevailed in last night's much-watched Democratic primary for Arizona's 7th congressional district. The former Pima County Board of Supervisors member defeated 25-year-old activist and social media influencer Deja Fox. If she wins in September's general election, Grijalva would fill the seat held by her father, who passed away in March. Adelita Grijalva is here with me now. Adelita, it's great to have you here. My condolences on your father's passing. I knew him here in Washington. There's a big conversation among Democrats nationally. What kind of Democrat are you? Are you a centrist Democrat? Are you a quiet progressive? Are you a fire-breathing resistance Democrat? Or is there some other category you'd like to define?
I am a progressive in the issues that are important to our community, like public education, protecting our democracy, pushing for comprehensive immigration reform, and making sure that our young people have an opportunity to reach their American dream.
One of the people who backed one of your opponents is David Hogg, who was a former DNC vice chair. He has asked for more activism, more energy, a more youthful spirit. How do you regard David Hogg's involvement not only in your race, but in the Democratic Party nationally, and how do you respond to those who want those in Congress to be more aggressive politically and from a policy perspective?
I understand that sentiment. I think right now there is a lot of frustration, a lot of angst, a lot of people that are just very angry at this administration and angry at their representatives for not sticking up. In this case specifically, there was no incumbent. This was an open seat. And so I think what is really important is that for organizations to identify what are the values that you see missing. Maybe people like representatives are not voting the way you'd like them to vote, or not shaking the values that you want to see, and then target that way. But in this case, I was the most progressive candidate on the ballot. I was speaking to the community about the issues that are important. All politics are local. And when you talk about an establishment, which was sort of like the caption that I was, the label that they were trying to give me as an establishment Democrat, I am established in this community. I am not an establishment Democrat in the way that they were trying to caption it. And so the attention that was coming at this race was making it seem as if, it's this establishment Democrat, do nothing Democrat versus someone young and fresh. And respectfully, I'm new to this position as well. And the voters in this community overwhelmingly heard our message and are giving me the opportunity to represent the Democratic ticket in the general. And I'm very appreciative.
In Arizona in 2016, it was close for Trump, he won. 2020, it was close for Biden, he won. 2024, it was a blowout, Trump won. What happened in Arizona, and how does that political transformation flow through your community and your ideas about how to approach life in Congress should you be elected?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important is when we're talking about this administration, making it local, making the policies that are being passed and the initiatives that are going forward and the laws that have implications for every single member of our community, make sure that they understand what those are. I think that this time right now this is not normal. What we're experiencing is not normal. And in our community, specifically with many mixed status families, we have ICE agents walking up to people, pushing down doors, taking babies from mom's arms in hospitals. This is not normal either. So the anger that I sense when I'm going door to door and talking to voters has much to do with let's get to work together and stop this administration from running over every right we have in this democracy that we call America, and really pushing our elected leaders to represent the people that elected them and put them in that office. And I have a history of doing that, as my father did. So in this community, Grijalva means established and present and here and ready to listen. And that's what we've done our entire lives. That's what I've done my entire adult life. And I am really proud to represent this community as a whole.
Fresh off her primary victory, Adelita Grijalva, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. President Trump signals a change on Ukraine. So why did it take him so long to take a new approach to Vladimir Putin? I ask Vice President Mike Pence next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Thanks for hanging out with us. Russia, stop me if you heard this before, is continuing to strike Ukraine. This despite President Trump's recent demand that Russia agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine, at least within the next 50 days. A drone strike overnight left at least 8 people injured and firefighters battling blazes in several buildings. Russian strikes pounded 4 different Ukrainian cities overnight. I asked former Vice President Mike Pence earlier today about the situation in Ukraine and the president's apparent evolving position, not just on Vladimir Putin, but on weapons shipments to Ukraine. It appears the president has done a U-turn on Ukraine. Why do you think that happened?
Well, first off, I want to commend the president for releasing additional military resources and at least setting a deadline for strong, including secondary sanctions against Russia.
That's not where he was when he came in.
I mean,
in January.
I think President Trump is starting to realize that Vladimir Putin does not want peace. He wants Ukraine. 3 years ago, Putin launched a brutal and unprovoked invasion into Ukraine that has cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and he needs to be held to account. Now, I want to stipulate that I think President Biden did a terrible job explaining our interest to the American people. I mean, Major, I watched those speeches from my home in Indiana. He would talk in gauzy terms about democracy and freedom. And look, I don't know that Ukraine is any paragon of a democracy.
It has its issues.
But they've had their issues. And I
corruption and otherwise.
Well, I confronted President Zelensky on those very issues in one-on-one meetings with him during
It's something bigger than that, is what you're saying.
Well, I think the reason why the United States is right to give Ukraine the resources they need to repel and defeat the Russian invasion is because I have no doubt that if Vladimir Putin overruns Ukraine, it's only a matter of time before he crosses a border where our men and women in uniform are going to have to fight him.
Have no choice. We'll have no choice.
Look, I've met Vladimir Putin. I've talked to him closer than I'm talking to you. I've told him things he didn't want to hear. Mm-hmm. I think this is a man who's made his ambitions about reclaiming the old Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe no secret.
But to that point, Mr. Vice President, you've been clear-eyed about Vladimir Putin. Lots of people, not named Donald Trump, have been clear-eyed about Vladimir Putin. He's only coming to this realization now. What took so long?
Well, I think some of the isolationist voices around the president lost their footing when they opposed a U.S. military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities.
Tie those two things together for me.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to have voices like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon saying that we should cut off all U.S. military support in Ukraine. It was another thing to hear those same voices saying that we shouldn't stand with Israel, that we shouldn't be prepared to use military force to prevent Iran from obtaining a usable nuclear weapon. I saw the president actually came out fairly harshly.
So one undermined the other, is what you're saying.
Look, I've said before, President Donald Trump is not an isolationist. I think it violates a bit of his nature. By definition, he has a bias for leadership.
He's not an interventionist, though, and he's not a traditional Reagan-type Republican when it comes to the idea of multilateralism and free trade and open immigration. So he's something else.
Well, he's not an interventionist. I think we demonstrated in our years together that we didn't hesitate to use military force, but always as a last resort.
Yeah.
And that's why I never doubted, but I was still very proud that the president would dispatch those B-2s over Iran to take out those nuclear facilities. Because at the end of the day, he knows how to make a decision. He knows how to lead. But I have a sense that having heard the voices of those isolationists in and outside the administration, even speaking against standing with Israel
And
in
clearly,
their fight, that may have caused him to think again about Putin's ambitions and brutality, and the need for us to marshal the free world to stand with Ukraine.
And then clearly hearing from Putin over and over in telephone calls, and then seeing what would happen after the phone calls would end, and the gap between them.
Yeah.
Trump finally got it. Said, he is jerking me around.
Yeah,
The president said much worse than that, Mr. Vice President.
Yes,
I'm cleaning it up for you.
Yeah, no, he has. And I just, I'm encouraged by it. I'm encouraged by the president's willingness to stand so firmly with Israel.
Because the Senate is
Israel.
prepared to do a sanctions bill. All the president has to do is give him a green light.
They are, and I think it's about 85 co-sponsors.
Right.
And I want to be grateful for the president's move toward demonstrating that he knows America is the leader of the free world. And again, I will tell you that, you know, I had my critics. I had that presidential campaign. I ran in the primary in 2023. Might be the last time we saw each other. And I had my critics because I actually went and visited Ukraine during my presidential campaign. And I understood the concern people had. I mean, we had the worst crisis at our southern border in history, the worst inflation in 40 years. I mean, the argument that we couldn't worry about Ukraine anymore or
should worry
other
about
free
it less.
nations because we have issues here at home.
That was a compelling argument.
Yeah, it was. But I always held the view that anyone who thinks that we can't solve our problems at home
Address them
and be the leader of the free world's got a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. I always believe we can do both. We're doing both right now, and I'm encouraged by it. But I also want to say to you, you know, remember we were talking about our kids before the cameras started rolling.
Yeah.
My son's a major in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
My son-in-law is a lieutenant in the Navy. People accuse me of support for Ukraine will lead us to World War III. My response to them always was, well, you ought to study World War II a little bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, if you allow dictators to have their way, to run roughshod over lesser countries, that's what leads you to global conflict. Standing firm early on and setting parameters and saying to the likes of Putin and any other authoritarian leader in the world, we're not going to let you redraw international lines by force. That's how we secure a peaceful and prosperous future.
Joining me now at the family table, Megan Scully covers Congress for Bloomberg News, and Daniela Diaz has the same beat for Notice. Remember, that's News of the U.S. Megan, your response to what you heard from the former vice president on Trump coming around to his point of view.
So I think that this has been probably the most stark change of course for the president in the first 6 months of his administration. When you think back to that February meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky and how rattling that was for a lot of our alliances overseas, particularly European nations, concerned
Felt
about
like pulling apart.
Absolutely, and we have seen this reversal. You know, largely from the phone call that you alluded to in your interview with the former vice president. Between Trump and Putin. And Trump is now on board with getting Patriot missiles to Ukraine, is talking about amping up artillery, drone interceptors. Right now, Ukraine is getting hit really hard, even with the U.S. envoy in country. And he's talking about this. But, we should also note, however, that Trump is saying, we're going to make these weapons, but we're not going to fund them. Right. Europe is on the hook for funding it.
To buy them and then flow through NATO.
Yes.
But it's still into the battle space, which is not where he was 6 months ago.
Could I just add, it was really interesting to hear former Vice President Mike Pence almost praise Donald Trump and his position on where he is on Ukraine. He didn't offer a lot of criticism. He even said, I'm hearing that he's not listening to the isolationists in his world anymore. It seems like he's really moving forward and trying to be a leader. It was really a stark contrast to what we heard from him on different issues recently.
So, Megan, at Bloomberg News, you pay very close attention to all sorts of things financial. And near the top of that list is the fate of the Fed Chairman Jerome Powell.
Yes, big news today in that regard. You all wrote the story, and several other news organizations, including us, followed up that, Trump in this meeting, this Oval Office meeting last night with hardliners in the House, floated the idea of firing Powell, which has been, of course, sort of top of mind for the financial markets and others watching this closely. For months now, there's been so much tension between the president and Powell over interest rates in particular, and in the last few days, we have seen, tension rise over renovations at the Fed that have gone over cost estimates, which the Fed says because of inflation.
Back to square one.
Then, however, Trump walked it back in the Oval, saying, it's unlikely, highly unlikely, I think he said, that he would fire Powell. Powell only has 8 months left on his term as chair. But still, we watched the financial markets go down after the news and then back up, when stability seemed to take hold again. Trump obviously is very mercurial and prone to changing his mind. So it remains to be seen what exactly happens. But, he reportedly actually showed these House lawmakers a letter saying, this is what I would give him to fire him. So we'll see what happens next.
Zohran Mamdani was on Capitol Hill today, and we have some sound, I believe, control room from Pramila Jayapal, who was once the chair of the House Progressive Caucus. She's still a very influential voice in that caucus. Let's listen.
Look, he's bringing anybody who can see the reality of the success of his candidacy and his campaign together. Anybody that's staying out at this point instead of endorsing this incredible dynamic leader is missing an opportunity.
Danielle, how did it go over?
It went over very well. I mean, he largely spoke to a group of progressives. Of course, there were some centrists there. Josh Gottheimer, interestingly, who has criticized Mamdani, was actually one of the people in this group. But it was really interesting after talking to these lawmakers. They wanted to hear his success story. They saw the campaign that he ran in New York, and instead of talking about issues, hot button issues, while he was on the campaign trail, he focused on issues that he knew Americans in New York City citizens, residents cared about. And that's what they wanted to hear. How did he do that? How did he reach voters? How did his message resonate? And tips for that. And it really seemed that was what this discussion was. And honestly, a lesson that the Democratic Party needs to have in the wake of all that loss that they had in the November 2024 election.
Daniela Diaz, Megan Scully, thank you so much for being here at the family table. Hope you come back. Where am I going, guys? Number 2, okay, right there. President Trump's library is still several years away, but he's already raised millions and millions of dollars toward its construction, and that has raised concerns among some Senate Democrats about where the money came from and what it might have attached to it in terms of strings or some other influence. Exclusive reporting on that next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back. Fundraising for presidential libraries is many things. One of them is opaque, and that's turning out to be true for President Trump. Now, a sitting president can accept library donations of any amount from anyone. That includes those seeking presidential pardons, businesses with federal contracts, and people from other countries. Some Democratic lawmakers say Trump uniquely is taking advantage of this absence of guardrails, either in terms of transparency or rules of the road. And they're pushing legislation that would put some rules of the road in place. CBS News political investigative producer Madeline May joins me now. So, what do we know about how much money has been raised and maybe some of the sourcing?
So, it's notoriously very difficult to see inside of funding for presidential libraries. What our analysis found is that the president so far has raised up to $63 million for his future library, primarily from settlements with news organizations and social media organizations, including ABC News, Meta, X, and Paramount, which is the parent company of CBS News. That $63 million is probably just the tip of the iceberg. For example, the president earlier this year accepted a $400 million jet from the Qatari royal family, and that jet will become an asset of his library. Not to mention, whatever money is left over from the inauguration funds will also be funneled into the library.
And I talked to Massachusetts Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren about this earlier today, and let's listen to that sound.
The American people have a lot of reasons to distrust government. This is a problem we ought to be able to fix. It's been a problem bipartisan in the past, and it's a problem we can fix right now. Just let's pass a law, put some constraints in place.
What would those constraints be?
Today, 12 Senate Democrats, led by Senator Warren and Blumenthal, introduced legislation to put some guardrails on these presidential library funds. That includes a cap on contributions while the president is in office. Right now, as you said, anybody can give any amount of money while that president is still serving. It also includes required public disclosures of donations. Right now, you can donate and no one would ever know. And it also explicitly makes it illegal for the president to personally benefit from funds appropriated for his library.
Madeline May, that's great stuff. I appreciate it very, very much. He called it essentially digital fentanyl. Up next, Vice President Mike Pence and his concerns about TikTok. He has a lot of them. That's next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. President Trump said he would reveal the, quote, very wealthy people preparing to buy TikTok in about 2 weeks. That comment is now, let me check, 17 days old. So I asked former Vice President Mike Pence about the president's efforts to keep TikTok vibrantly alive here in the United States, despite the fact that there's a law on the books banning it.
I'm very concerned that we're sending the wrong signals to China. I mean, look, TikTok is a national security threat to the United States.
And they don't want to give up the algorithm, which is why they can't find a deal.
Well, and it's important for your viewers to understand the algorithm that is used by TikTok in the United States is banned in China.
Ought to be a clue.
Ought to be a clue that is highly addictive, invasive, and
a data scraper.
TikTok today represents a fundamental compromise of the security and privacy of the American people. And the time has come for the administration to draw the line, insist that China agree to a sale or shut it down. That's in the interest of the United States. And more importantly, it's what the law requires, Major.
And by not doing it, we look weak.
Well, that, and I would also say, I think 25% tariffs on Korea and Japan also send a very harmful message.
In the region.
In the region, because what it essentially does is it tempts our allies in the region to stop looking east and start looking west to China. That, look, we have strong economic relationships. Doesn't mean they can't be improved. I was put in charge of a working group to negotiate a free trade agreement with Japan. We were well down the road on that during our administration. But imposing a 25% tariff on Japan, on Korea, and at the same time continuing to kick the can down the road on TikTok, I think sends the wrong message to China. We ought to be strong. We ought to be strong protecting the security and privacy of the American people, and we ought to be strong and building ties and free trade with our allies in the region.
That is it for The Takeout today. What a show we had. Please tune in tomorrow for my conversation with White House Trade Advisor Peter Navarro. Please stick around. The Daily Report is coming up next right here on CBS News 24/7.